Chag Sameach and happy Thanksgiving. There is a great story found in our Talmud about an especially curious character called Honi HaMe'agel, Honi the circle maker. Our sages teach that once most of the month of Adar, when Purim happens, had passed, but still no rain had fallen. So they sent a message to Honi which said, Hitpalel v'yardu geshamim, pray and rain will fall. Honi prayed, but no rain fell. So he drew a circle in the dust and stood inside it, just like our prophets once did. Honi said before God, Master of the universe, your children have turned their faces towards me, as I am like a member of your household. Therefore, I take an oath by your great name that I will not move from here until you have mercy upon your children and answer their prayers for rain. Rain began to trickle down, but only in small droplets. His students said to him, Rabbi, we have seen that you can perform great wonders, but this quantity of rain is not enough to ensure that we will not die. Honi turns to God and says, I did not ask for this, but for rain to fill the cisterns, ditches, and caves. Rain then began to fall furiously until each and every drop was as big as the mouth of a barrel. His student said to him, It seems that you can call on God to perform miracles and we will not die, but now it appears as if the rain is going to destroy our world. Honi again speaks before God. I did not ask for this harmful rain either, but for the rain of benevolence, blessing, and generosity. Subsequently, the rains fell in their standard manner until all the people sought higher ground and ascended to the Temple Mount due to rain. They said to him, Rabbi, just as you prayed that the rains should fall, so too, please pray that they should stop. He said to them, This is the tradition that I received, that one does not pray over an excess of good. Honi continued, Nevertheless, bring me a bull. I will sacrifice it as a thanksgiving offering and pray at the same time. So they brought him a bull. Honi placed his 2 hands on its head and said before God, Master of the universe, your nation Israel, whom you brought out of Egypt, cannot bear either an excess of good or an excess of punishment. You grew angry with them and withheld rain, and they are unable to bear it. You bestowed upon them too much good, and they were also unable to bear it. May it be your will that the rain stop and that there be relief for the world. Immediately the wind blew, the clouds dispersed, the sun shone, and everyone went out to the fields and gathered for themselves the mushrooms that had sprouted in the heavy rain. The sages thus relayed to Honi HaMe'agel, If you were not Honi, we would have declared cherem, excommunication, upon you. For wouldn't the name of heaven have been desecrated by your oath to not leave the circle until it rained? However, what can we do, as you nag God and the Eternal does your bidding? Why, you may now be asking, do I tell you this strange story on this morning? I tell it because a strange and wonderful festival deserves a strange but wonderful story. And Sukkot is a strange festival indeed. Think about it. Just a few moments ago, we took out a collection of rather exotic plants and fruits, the lulav and etrog, and bound them together, shook them in all different directions in an almost paganistic, primitive ritual. Let's be real. How might that look to someone walking into our sanctuary, a random person who did not have any cultural or religious context for this custom? Someone looking in from the outside might ask themselves, what are these people praying for? In fact, even as Jews, with all the right context, we might still ask ourselves this question. Let's start from the beginning. Sukkot was, of course, initially an agricultural festival, being one of the 3 biblical Mo'adim, or periods in which we alighted to Jerusalem to offer sacrifices of thanksgiving to God as a sign of gratitude for a bountiful harvest. On that note, we also learn in our Mishnah that on Sukkot, judgment is passed regarding the rain, with rain and the water it brings being crucial to the success of the crop yield. As such, an original hope of the festival, like Choni standing in his circle, might have been to bring on the rain. We see this both implicitly and explicitly. Implicitly, if you close your eyes for just a moment and listen to the shaking of the lulav and the etrog, the rattling of the different branches is reminiscent of the sound of rainfall. If any of you ever went to camp, when I learned this idea, I couldn't help but to think of when I was on camp, when I was younger, and we had our own version of a kind of rain dance that we would do at Havdalah, during which we would rub our hands together and click our fingers, I'm terrible at clicking, and also tap a beat on our thighs in a kind of round and we were standing, funnily enough, in a big circle, until eventually, silence, eventually, an almost reverence. It is this reverence for the natural world and its unpredictability which led our rabbis living in the land of Israel, in which rain is scarce and drought can be rampant, to explicitly pray for rain. During this period of sacred time, this Moed, you will notice that we will transition on Shmini Atzeret from saying Morid Hatal, you, God, who causes the dew to descend, to Mashiv Haruach Umorid Hagashem, you cause the wind to blow and the rain to fall, in our Amidah blessings. There is a certain irony to this, as we are taught, or might even come to our own logical conclusion, that we don't actually want rain to fall during Sukkot, because that would ruin our ability to fulfill the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah. It's a bit hard to eat outside in a storm. However, the Mishnah will outline the rabbi's increasing anxiety in the event and that the rain falls later and later in the year. At a certain point, the rabbis, in supplementation to their prayers, also begin to fast from sunrise to sundown each day. If the rain still does not arrive, the entire community is then beholden to 3 different fasts, similarly to the rabbis, meaning that it lasted from sunrise to sundown. Finally, if the rain continues to stay in the heavens, the fasting gets ever more severe, until at one point the entire community, including the rabbis, are observing the customs of mourning. So let's cut to the chase. Why all this fascination with and focus on the rain? The rain has the power to sustain or even to bring abundance, and equally has the power to destroy, either because there's too much of it or not enough. After all, as much as we rely on the rain to grow food for us to eat and provide water for us to drink, we have witnessed over even recent weeks the devastating effects of the rain when Mother Nature is unleashed, with post-tropical storm Fiona battering the Atlantic coast of our good country. The idea of our abiding reliance upon nature and lack of control over it was something the rabbis deeply understood and which strikes close to heart, as many are still left in recovery, cleaning up debris at this time and restoring national landmarks that have been toppled, if not lost forever, like the iconic teacup rock on Prince Edward Island. As such, this natural phenomenon and its prevalence in our Sukkot traditions are perhaps more about what it might represent, the inherent human condition of fragility. Our Sukkot themselves, for example, are inherently fragile. They are temporary structures that can only be built within a certain time frame, can only stay up for a certain time frame, and are constructed from rather flimsy materials, from the walls to the roof to the schach itself, even though we have a beautiful wooden sukkah at Holy Blossom, which we'll go out to shortly. One mighty gust of wind and it could all come crashing down. There is also, ideologically, a certain further irony found at this festival associated with these structures in their temporality. With Sukkot being, as we know, one of the Shalosh Regalim, or pilgrimage festivals, despite the injunction to dwell for 7 days in the Sukkah, we are equally commanded to leave these homes and instead travel to Jerusalem to offer up a part of our autumn harvest. Subsequently, we're caught in this strange place, physically and emotionally, where we are simultaneously home in these booths which we work hard to create as homes, even if only for a week, and not at home when we find ourselves leaving our place of residence for the pilgrimage festival in pursuit of an obligation to travel to our ancestral home. Or nowadays, with no temple to be found in which to bring these offerings, we even find ourselves longing for a home that doesn't exist in the same way anymore. Our Torah portion this morning, found in the book of Leviticus, places a further twist, as it is written that the purpose of the Sukkot is so that future generations may know that the Eternal made our people dwell in booths while on their wilderness journey, as they were brought out of slavery from Egypt. In other words, the very creation and existence of Sukkot are a manifestation of a story in which our ancestors did not have a home in any sense of the word, as they wandered in the desert. As such, when we think of this well-known phrase associated with this time of our year, Zman Simchatenu, the time of our rejoicing, we recognize that it is not an undiluted joy, and a joy that we can interpret in two different ways, with two different reactions. The first is that we can be anxious and rejoice in an almost panicked state, out of fear that God could take away that which makes us happy at any given moment. After all, Jerry read for us that famous line in our Haftarah this morning from the book of Kohelet, L'chol zman ve'et, to everything there is a season. Further to that, through our commandments to dwell in fragile booths and to bring the fragile four species together, we now know that the festival of Sukkot may not be about nature itself, but about God's ultimate dominion over nature, and by extension, our very fates. We could thus remain in our Sukkot and, agoraphobic, refuse to venture out or refuse to let anyone in for fear of being disappointed or hurt, scared, as in the story of Honi the circle maker, of too much of either a good or too much of even a bad thing. Yet we are commanded, as Rabbi Splansky taught over Shabbat, Chag HaSukkot ta'aseh lecha, make for yourselves the festival of Sukkot. We may be implored to build a sukkah in the sense of the temporary dwelling / booth, but the real commandment, the mitzvah of the festival, is to make it for yourself. So what do we mean? From this, we can learn that the alternative may be to rejoice, despite this tightrope upon which we are constantly walking, and to find meaning in this occasion by holding on to and expressing gratitude for that which we treasure. This is perhaps the reason why one of the beautiful customs over this coming week is the welcoming of ushpizin, or guests, into our Sukkot and making, aseh, the festival with them. Whilst one way to do this is, yes, to place the sach on the roof of the canopy of the sukkah, I would suggest that through welcoming others in, whether over a meal or a cup of coffee, we turn our temporary dwellings into temporary homes, and in this way truly make the festival. For it is our loved ones who we invite to spend time with and make memories with us, our friends, families, neighbors, fellow congregants, newcomers, that make our lives rich and full, granting them a purpose which can strengthen us in a fragile world. In other words, if Sukkot is a reminder of the meaning and purpose of our lives in spite of the fragility of the world around us, the Sukkah itself then becomes this reminder that we are not alone in this journey, and that when we share our hearts, our homes, and our burdens, and when we lift each other up through simple acts, simple mitzvot of hospitality, life becomes far more worth living. Which brings us, well, full circle to our friend, Choni the circle maker. The Gemara relates that another story about Choni HaMe'agel. Rabbi Yochanan said, all the days of the life that the righteous man, Choni, he was distressed over the meaning of the verse, a song of ascents. When Adonai brought back those who returned to Zion, we were like dreamers. And we might recognize that line from our Birkat Hamazon on Shabbat. Shuva Adonai et Shivat Zion hayinu kecholmim. He said to himself, is there really a person who can sleep and dream for 70 years? How is it possible to compare the 70-year exile in Babylonia to a dream? One day, Choni was walking along the road when he saw a certain man planting a carob tree. Choni said to him, this tree, after how many years will it bear fruit? The man said to him, it will not produce fruit until 70 years have passed. Choni then said, is it obvious to you that you will live 70 more years, that you expect to benefit from this tree? The man replied, that man found himself a world full of carob trees. So just as my ancestors planted for me, I too am planting for my descendants. So what are we really praying for on this weird and wonderful festival which we observe together today? We pray, in short, that we may be nourished in body and mind, that we may see a bright and prosperous future for ourselves and our loved ones. We pray for lives of blessing, that we may be sources of nourishment in a world in which we are not always sure of our own abilities. We pray for strength in this endeavor amidst a world full of fragility, recognizing that it is God's earth and we are simply living in it. As we conclude today in that spirit of weirdness and wonderfulness, we take a line not from our morning but our evening liturgy. Ufros aleinu Sukkot shlomecha. May God spread over you and all those you love a shelter of peace. On this day of Thanksgiving, both Jewishly and secularly, we express gratitude for and embrace the fullness of life in all of its circles and seasons. Moadim l'simcha, Chag Sameach.